The default setting for who is telling the story is that you're telling the story. When you sit down to write a story, it is assumed and it is a given that you, the author of the story, are having a conversation through paper with the reader. And that is used a lot, and there are a lot of creative things you can do with that scenario. Subconsciously, a story never takes place in a vacuum. Every time someone reads a story, subconsciously they are aware of who it is they think it is telling the story, and who they think that individual is telling the story to. Now, one convention that is used a lot is to use a narrator. So instead of the story being written from you, the writer, you kind of envelope the story inside. You have a narrator who starts out. The narrator is a character, and you sort of introduce in their own little story, the narrator describe who they are, where they are, who they're telling the story to. They're most often telling the story to another fictional character as the reader looks in anonymously. And then the whole story is told by this supposed narrator and told from their point of view. Another convention that has been used a lot to great avail is a story written all in letters. So instead of it being author-readers, you have a different setup where you have someone writing a personal letter, and it isn't being written to the reader, it's being written to someone else. It could be someone the writer knows well, it could be letters to a newspaper. And so it's a different setting where you have the author that the readers never meet, and to the general public. It's a little bit more personal and specific. Recommended reading, the Letters of Van Gogh. These are letters written by Van Gogh to his brother Theo, and these are amazingly written. Van Gogh was not just a great painter, but also a great writer. Now, one reason that paying attention to this is so important is this is one of those subconscious things that happens in writing and reading that I'm talking about, where without consciously thinking about it, the reader is assessing who it is writing the story. The reader, without consciously setting out to do it, will keep track of the bias and the fallacies of thought that happen with the person telling the story. Even if it's the default author, if you sit to read a story by Dostoevsky, you're looking at how true is their vision? How much are there things in the story that reveal weaknesses of insight and outlooks that the author is giving away in the story. And when the story is written from a narrator, we're also subconsciously thinking about that. When the fictional character, the narrator of the story, is telling the story, you can creatively give them biases and blind spots, and sort of show the scope and the range of their outlook on life and the story and their general beliefs and everything that makes up their personal reality. Because basically to not have a bias, to not have blind spots, to not have limited view, for a human it's impossible. It's a predominant part of human nature that each of us have limited insights, and our outlook on our reality is very much limited to and it will be like that whether we whether we try to reach beyond it or not. And it is not a bad thing. It is, at the end of the day, it's just part of human nature. The Letters of Van Gogh, we, the readers, are able to get an outside viewpoint of the limitations of what about reality Van Gogh was able to grasp at and see. And we appreciate him all the more for that. He seems all the more human for his limitations of insight than, as much so for his profound insight. Even if you're telling the story as you, the author, to the general public, the readers, you have a lot of opportunity for creativity. You can decide to tell the story in a manic mood where the person telling the story is very agitated while they're telling it, and it can have a great effect on how the overall impression that story makes. In the book Pale Fire by Nabokov, it's a story about really a sad domestic situation that actual situation didn't cover that long a period of time, but it's told through a narrator who's absolutely out of his mind, and that's as much part of the story. The condition of the narrator is as much part of the story as the story itself. You can have the story being told by the protagonist or one of the characters taking part in the story, and then then later on you can have the same story retold by a different character in the story and realize how completely different and switched around everything seems, and how everyone in the story seems like different people, and get new insight about the story and get a chance to see kind of more of the possibility of what is happening beyond a personal reality. I know that when I first think of a narrator, the first thing that comes to mind is that sort of cheesy, movie setup where at the beginning it's like, oh, it's time for a story, and they take out the leather-bound book, and here's, Grandpa's going to tell a story, and, la-di-da, it's all kind of cheesy. But that's only one tiny example of the use of a narrator. Think about how the narrator could be like a war correspondent who in the first 2/3 of the book goes to this foreign country and is telling the story from their point of view, and then everyone has to evacuate that country, and the last third of the story is about the same narrator trying to continue to tell the story of what's happening in this country, but their point of view is being limited by the fact that they can't be there anymore, and they have to do everything they can to continue to tell their story from their new point of view. So another big part about this who is telling the story is who is the audience? Who are you writing to? If it isn't really worked out who the book is supposedly being written for, then it's very important to clarify in your mind who you're writing to, who your audience is. While you're writing, you're using the psychology of who you're subconsciously writing to. And this works into who you're trying to entertain. It can be, there are situations in writing where it's like, please yourself first. Don't be too anxious about pleasing others. But if you yourself think it's good writing and it's entertaining and it's pleasing to you, that in the long run is going to produce the best writing. And also this could be a big part of writer's block, where while someone's writing, subconsciously they're thinking, oh, so-and-so wouldn't think that's funny, or well, oh, and so-and-so wouldn't think that was, that great of writing. And one thing I do is when I'm writing kind of who it is, who I kind of imagine is going to pick up the book and read it, is exactly the individual who would enjoy the kind of story I'm very interested in writing. And I don't know what their name is, and I don't know what they do for a living, anything like that. All I know, I just kind of vaguely think of them as the individual who would very much enjoy exactly the kind of story I want to write. If you want to really reinforce this whole use of who is doing the writing, take your writing to read it in front of a writer's group or an open mic, and read it, and you will be placed in that situation. And now these concepts will become very noticeable to you and a big part of what you're aware of, because you'll be very aware of what you're reading and who you're reading it to, and it will give you, it's a great exercise about what writing really is, and that whole psychology space of who it is telling the story and who it is listening to the story. Another thing is where through the writing you can write very much from the protagonist point of view, and very much that it is not a story being written, but you're writing your story in such a way so that it's just the experience of the protagonist, and not a story being communicated to anyone, but through the writing as much as possible trying to enforce the idea that this is just something, so that while the reader is reading, they feel like they're there going through what your protagonist is going through, and it isn't being a story being told to anyone, but just an experience that your reader is allowed to have. If you're going to write as you, the author, writing a story for an audience, ask yourself, what part do you play in the writing? Are you going to be like the Wizard of Oz, behind the curtain, hidden away, invisible as much as possible to the readers, and creating, this amazing world, but you yourself trying to stay out of the picture as much as possible? I've known stories where the author kind of becomes a character, and they themselves step into the story, and there's a lot of room for creativity. If you tell a story about about ants that discover a half-eaten apple on the ground, well, that may not be too exciting, but if you tell the story from the point of view of one of the ants as they climb over these great chunks of dirt and discover, this, food for the next several months, that could make for a very exciting story. Remember that ahead of time you can decide how much the one telling the story knows and how much they see. Even if you are writing as the author, writing for the public, you can kind of decide ahead of time, well, what are we going to limit the point of view of the one telling the story to? And those limitations can have a great effect, can be used to great effect to tell a better story. How does that work? Again, the ants discovering the eaten apple. If you're limiting the point of view from the experience of an ant on the ground, that's much more limited than someone standing up above, able to see all the ants and all around the apple and move around and have a greater understanding about the whole situation, can look up and see that there are rain clouds rapidly moving in. But to not know that in the next 10 minutes it's going to rain, to have a much more limited point of view makes it a much more effective story. It can be told, it's much more exciting to see it from that much more limited point of view. Even if you do know everything that is going to happen and everything that is going on in all the minds of all your characters, you can still decide to great effect to write as if you don't know, so that when you're sitting down writing your story, write it as if you have no idea that those three characters went off and had a meeting and decided on this, so that in your story it's a complete surprise when you know something such and such happens that totally changes all the circumstances. So deciding the limits to what the voice telling the story can see and know can have a great effect on the story. In my experience, writing from a limited point of view readers are more interested in that, because it is our reality as humans that we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. We don't know how all these different important circumstances are going to play out. We're constantly living in situations of very limited understanding and knowledge of our circumstances that are all important to us. And so that when we read fiction that plays with this same kind of human condition, we become very connected to it. We become very interested in that kind of fiction. There's just endless creative possibilities for what you can do. You can decide that the voice writing the story, even if you don't clearly define a narrator, you can flavor it with a personality, and you can do that to humor, or you could do that for a lot of different effect, helping to enhance your storytelling. Also, you don't have to come up with anything super fancy either. Me personally, I like to write in the default state where I'm the author writing for an audience, and there are subtle things that I decide along the way, and I try to keep a very clear view about what that voice is all about, and have an idea about who the audience is, and so don't feel like this is something you need to do. Just it is important to pay attention to who it is telling the story and who it is the story is being told to. But there's infinite amount of creative possibilities with what you can do. At the end of the day, it's the story itself that is most important. Okay, here's the rundown. I hope that there's some information that was in this video that you can find useful in your writing. I hope your writing goes really good. Please, if you have time, visit. I'm working on a story that I'm illustrating and putting it up on the website solomation.com. It's going to take years to do, and I'm hurrying to try to get the next episode out. As soon as I get it done, I'll post it up on the website so that everyone can watch it. And to encourage me to make more of these tutorials, please hit the like button, leave a comment, and subscribe, and I hope you have a good day.